So I try to come to these videos with like a relatively positive outlook on the internet being a medium for art. I mean, like, it'd be kind of crazy if I didn't, because that's like essentially what I'm doing here, right? I'm trying to use the internet as a way to display art outside of the regular means. And I think, like, you know, part of the reason why I want to do this, why I try to do that so much, is because I think that, like, there's a serious lack of that. You know, if you look at the way things are compared to 50, even 100 years ago, like, there's not quite as many, like, there's not any big artists, you know? I think painting and the fine arts, and even, like, to an extent, a lot of, like, literature, you know, adjacent things, have become more of subcultures than they have mainstream public parts of pop culture like they once were, you know? Like, it's just not the same as it was. And I think in an attempt to try to use the internet as a not a replacement, but as looking to this as like, this is the next place where this will be, right? And I do hold that positive outlook. I mean, it'd be crazy if I had a doom and gloom perspective on this, considering I'm here doing it every day. But with that being said, there is an extent to which I need to, like, just recognize that, like, as much as in theory the internet is a fantastic place for art to be, it's kind of not happening, right? And you know, I started this from the lens of talking about this series, Paint&Talk, but there's also, you know, I mean, removing it from Paint&Talk, I'm not trying to say this is all about this series in particular. I'm more talking about, like, culture in general. Like, this isn't quite happening like the math makes sense, right? And sort of the place that really got me thinking about this is I saw a clip of Matty Healy, the lead singer of the 1975, on a podcast, and he was talking about how culture kind of stagnated after the year 2000, you know, whatever. He didn't really have a specific year, but he was just talking about the stagnation of culture. And it was actually really interesting. What he was talking about is, like, basically, if you go back to the year 1960 and show them something from 1990, it'll be extremely foreign to them. Like, it'll be the most, you know, crazy thing they've ever heard. They wouldn't really comprehend it as being music or art or whatever you want to say. But if you go back to the year 1960 and show them a lot of the artists around today and a lot of the art that we have coming out of, like, our modern day cultural, you know, landscape, whatever you want to call it, it would be extremely common to them, you know? Like, we don't really have a sound for the year 2025 like you can point to a sound for the year 1994. And I thought it was a really interesting thing, you know? Did the clip go into, like, a comprehensive talk or anything? No. But it was an interesting enough observation, worthy of, I think, you know, being a video on the internet, more worthy for sure than a lot of the stuff I post, you know what I mean? And I was going to the comments expecting to see people, you know, maybe discussing it or sharing thoughts on this thing, and all that people were saying was, like, you know, the common stuff you see, right? Where it was like, bros on to nothing, or you know, just talking to talk. Is this guy aware that his band's name is the 1975? And it's like, it seems like, and again, this is me extrapolating so much from so little here, it seems like these people are just allergic to any sort of serious dialogue, though, on the internet. And this really got me thinking about the fact of, like, you know, as much as the internet should be this awesome place where so much good discussion is happening, you know, I think it's I mean, you guys know my thoughts on this, right? I've talked about it extensively on Paint&Talk, that, like, I think the internet is an opportunity, you know? Like, it's so cool that we can expand like this. And in a sense, I mean, I have to acknowledge, like, it's really cool what has happened. You know, even if I look at stuff like this and I get kind of doomerish about things, like, the average person, you know, example just for me, like, at 9 years old, I was able to learn about all the Renaissance painters because of YouTube. Whereas, like, you know, in the past, I would have had to go to a library. Maybe I wouldn't have gotten quite the same education that I could have because of the internet. Like, in that sense, like, yeah, this is totally working. But in another very real sense, is as far as, like, a prominent conversation going on that logically there should be, based on this giant medium coming, these giant platforms where you can discuss so much and learn so much with the internet, like there should be a lot more discussion happening. But people don't really like that. Like, people don't like this serious stuff. And part of it definitely does make me reevaluate how I feel moving away from this one clip. You know, that one clip was a jumping off board, but this whole idea that the internet has not stepped up to be a replacement for, galleries and cafes like I think it should be, or I theorize it will be. Part of it makes me question my beliefs, to put it simply. I don't know why that took me so long to say. Whereas, like, maybe I'm wrong about this in the sense that my presumption that, like, the internet will step up to be this thing where people come together to learn and all these things depends on this idea that the internet is what destroyed that culture sitting there before. Like, the reason that we don't have as much stuff out in the real world to look at anymore for this, barring major cities. Of course, if you look into a major city and you live near one, you can find these things still. But barring major cities, like, I assume that the reason we don't have these things anymore is because of the internet, that the internet's what killed a lot of this stuff. And I think, like, thinking about it and just, like, reevaluating my ideas a little bit here, I am just, like, objectively wrong in a sense, right? Because, like, and I don't know enough to, like, really go into this in depth, but it would be more socioeconomic circumstances that killed a lot of this stuff, right? And there's this interesting idea that, like, that I've heard, I guess just around, I can't really think of a specific place where I've heard it more than other places, that, like, we don't have, because of the way that, like, our institutions have played out over the last, couple decades, we don't really have the mobility that we used to. Like, all these things are on the decline. I'm not an economist, and I'm not smart enough to really explain the numbers that I've, like, when you see something and you can understand it, but you don't really have the skill or the vocabulary to re-articulate it. I'm in that camp with this, unfortunately, so I guess I can't go too much into this point. But, like, there are a lot of places where people don't have the same level of free time and the level of hobbies that they used to because of the way that, like, our economy has played out and all these things. These are just things I've seen that have led to the people not having the ability to make things like they used to put it in simplest terms. You can't work at a coffee shop, go home and work on your new experimental avant-garde band, and then go into work the next day and be fine. Like, we don't live in a world where you can really do that like you used to. I mean, there were so many. It's interesting, right? Because I guess I never put this together. Like, how many stories of great artists do we have who just kind of, like, existed? Like, they just kind of, like, went to work and then worked on their art because they needed that much free time for it. And, like, I don't know. I mean, I know some people who do it that way still. Like, it's harder, right? It's way harder to do that. Now you got to browse LinkedIn too. And with that being said, it's like, will the internet not step up to replace this not because the internet doesn't have a capacity to do so, but rather because the internet's not what killed it in the first place. If we see a world, let's say in 10 years, things get a little better, right? Because I mean, like, as much as I'm looking at things in, like, from the lens of, like, a bigger thing than I should be dealing with on a personal level here, like, I'm looking at sort of a big thing. The reality is this does happen in years of waves, right? Like 10, 20 years this happens. So let's say hypothetically in 10 years, things do rebound and you can, like, you can do that again. Like, that becomes a viable thing to do again. Will the internet be stepping up as the medium to do it? Or will it just go back to the way it was? Will people just hit up the coffee shops again, hit up the underground scenes, and those will be reinvigorated to the level that they were once at? Or is this a larger conversation that, like, a cultural shift has happened? I don't really believe that, though. I don't know. I kind of, like, I see a lot of times people will talk about culture in a very, like, not dumb, I guess, like, vapid way, right? I hate calling things dumb. I think I sound like such an asshole doing that. But a very vapid way of, like, the culture has just shifted in this direction. And it's like, all right, but, like how, why, when, who, where, like it leaves, it's basically just a blanket term for, like, this thing happened and I don't want to explain it, right? I mean, I've used it as that here on Paint and Talk a ton. Like, the word culture I've totally used as just like a, you guys know what I mean type of thing. I mean, how many times do I refer to the social media culture or landscape, right? So, like, I don't like the idea that, like, people just lost interest in the arts. I think that, like, something has, and if you go across the world, I don't think they, like, I know in Zurich they still have, like, a flourishing art scene from what I've seen. I've heard a lot of people say that, like, just institutions have gotten worse, and that's why, like, art institutions, not like the economy and stuff, but like art institutions are no longer interested in pushing the envelope like they once were. And I guess that's something of a reasoning, right? Because if you think about how art works, like the quote-unquote art world, where the real quote-unquote serious painters come from, lots of quotes today, I guess, like, they are very centralized. Like, it's not like there's much of a independent, you know, it's not like this is a very expansive thing. I would probably say that, like, 20 or 30 places control how things move. So maybe that could be a part of it. And, you know, like, coming back to just this idea of questioning my own preconceived notions about this, if I think the internet is going to step up as the next big place where art is, right? Why hasn't it yet? Like, what does it take for this to happen? Because, I mean, the internet's been, I'd say, around, like, 2016. From my estimation, as somebody who's, like, grown up with the internet, all these things, I feel like 2016 was around the time when things really were like, okay, no, the internet is, like, where things are at. Like, the internet's where things are happening. Content became so big. You know, that's why I feel like I started seeing all these YouTubers, like, branch off and do serious things, you know? So, like, what is it going to take past that? Like, the internet, I feel, has been the dominant cultural thing for about, like, a decade now. But, so if I believe that it's going to do this, why hasn't it yet? Would be my own question to myself. And that's why I think, like, maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe the internet's not where this thing's going to happen, and the internet's just, like, the nullifier making us okay with the fact that it's not happening, you know? Like, why look at paintings in a museum when you could scroll reels for an hour instead? You get less out of it, but it's, like, way more entertaining. I love art, and I'll never try and be act like it's not 10 times as stimulating to just go on your phone for an hour than go in a museum. I mean, when I'm in museums, like, in the, I don't know about, like, I can't say I've observed this in every museum I've been in, but I know, like, here in New York, in the Met especially, there's seats in almost every gallery section. Like, it's very rare to have a whole hallway where, there's nothing, it's just a blank floor. Every single seat has at least 3 people just scrolling on their phone. And it's like, I mean, I sound like such a boomer saying that, of, like, all these kids on their phones. But, like, it is interesting, right? That's, like, happening. Like, isn't that, like, it does say something, right? That, like, it is more entertaining to just scroll than it is to look up, you know? So maybe the internet is the reason, maybe it's twofold, you know? Maybe these other reasonings that are a little more high and mighty that I don't have the ability to articulate of the economy, are the reasoning why it started, and the internet is the reason why it can keep going, you know? I don't know, though. You know, I think today I've pitched a fairly pessimistic perspective on this, which is something I try to not come here and do, because I think there's already a lot of that. You know, I think there's a whole plethora of video essays you could go watch on why the whole world sucks right now. But I try not to be one of those. But I mean, like, if I'm doing this every day, like, eventually, you know, I'm gonna... Sometimes shit sucks, you know what I mean? So, anyways, go check out this painting over on the Instagram. I wanted to do a similar screaming face, but, like, a little more distorted. And, I like it. I think it came out pretty good. I think, the other day when I was editing... Maybe it was yesterday, maybe it was the day before, I was talking about how red makes things more visceral. And I think that, like, having muddy reds like I do in some areas of this make it feel very potent, you know? And I think that's interesting. So that's the painting. Go check it out over on Instagram, which is so thus far not replaced institutions as the dominant art galleries, as people say that it will, which is what we discussed here today. And until tomorrow, guys, gals, and pals, my name is Max Seiss. This has been Paint and Talk, episode 68. I'm here every morning painting and talking with you all.